stock car fans have seen many types of cars race at Nashville Motor Speedway, but when was the last time you saw something like this? It's a 1933 Chevy Coupe with a 62 Oldsmobile engine. It belongs to Charles Stoffel of Columbia, and this is the type helmet that they used to wear. Look at that. The helmet belongs to Malcolm Brady, remember him? And it was the first time Charles had been back to the track since he retired in the late 1960s.
Well, this car was built by James Lawrence Stoffel and James Damewood Stoffel for Jack Marlin of Franklin. That was in 1962. And Jack drove it 1 year, and then I switched over and drove it in 1963. Well, it was lighter. It was lighter and faster in the chutes than the heavier cars. It weighed 1,900 pounds, and the cars that run now are a little over 3,000. This is a car that was racing the last at this speedway in 1963. Was the last year that these raced.
Funny-looking car, but boy, they said they could go. Now, Channel 5 Sports will do a 5-part series on the history of stock car racing in Nashville in a couple of weeks, and such stories as you just saw will be included. In addition, we have some old photos and film footage dating way back to the late 40s that we'll show you then. We'll hope you'll keep that in mind and watch it. Motorsports Hall of Fame, and 3 of those 7 will be inducted into the Hall of Fame this Saturday at 4 o'clock at the Sheridan South at I-65, and they are Bill Donahoe, former track operator, of course. Benny Goodman, a former track operator. Jimmy Griggs, a driver. Cuckoo Marlin, of course, everybody knows, a former driver. Pete Page, a driver. Frank Reed, deceased driver. And Bob Reuther, a driver also. We'll know who those 3 inductees are on Saturday. Now, our series starts tonight on the history of stock car racing in Nashville, but you know, in other parts of the country, back in what, the middle 40s, the moonshiners...
Way before both our time.
Well, that's true, at least before your time. No, the moonshiners used to get out, you know, and they'd haul the liquor, and then they would square off in a cornfield somewhere and
race?
And race, and that's kind of how stock car racing... You'll probably hear other stories about how it started, but that's one of the ways in which it started. But our series will be for the next 5 nights, and we'll get into that in just a moment. And tradition are as rich here in Nashville as any city in the South where stock car racing was born some 40-odd years ago. Well, tonight we begin a 5-part series on the history of stock car racing in Nashville. It's called From Dirt Roads to Fast Tracks. The first stock car race ever held in Nashville was 39 years ago. It was 1948, and the newspaper headlines proclaimed the coming of a new sport. They would race at Cumberland Speedway, down by the river at 9th Avenue North, which now is the multi-million-dollar Metro Center. T.I. Albright and Claude Lampley had been promoting motorcycle races at Cumberland, and one of Nashville's first stock car drivers was Bob Reuther.
Well, Herbert Lewis and Jimmy Sawyer and I, we were friends and had a mutual interest in car racing, so we got out, scouted around some car dealers, car lots, and asked some guys, you know, how about getting an old junk car off the back of the car lot, and let's have some races down here. The old motorcycle track, Cumberland Speedway, which is right across the river over here from where we're standing now. And we showed up over there the first race with 11 cars and no purse or anything. We just had a good time. I turned over that day and scared my mother and sister half to death. They've never come to a race since then.
4 years later, the lease at Cumberland was canceled, and racing moved to the American Legion Bowl here in northeast Nashville, just a short distance from the Jefferson Street Bridge.
It was dirt and dusty. We used chemical calcium chloride to control the dust, but it really didn't do a good job on it. If you were leading a race, it was fine. If you were back in the field, you were feeling your way around the racetrack, and you'd run into obstacles in the dust sometimes.
Did the river over here play a part in it?
Once in a while, we'd lose a wheel. The old car's wheel would fly off, axle break or something, and that's the end of that wheel and tire. It's gone. It'd go in the river, and you'd never see it again.
Nobody's car ever went in the river, did they?
No, we never had any cars get in the river because there was a parking lot there. You'd, you know, go through the fence and hit parked cars out.
What kind of speed were you guys running back then? Any idea?
Well, I'd say probably at the end of the straightaway, maybe 65 or 70 miles an hour. It felt like you were flying.
Well, my sincerest thanks to Norman Parton and all of the other Nashville race fans who contributed to this series with their time, their old scrapbook pictures, and yes, black and white and color 8mm footage. And we'll continue tomorrow night looking at the transition period of when racing moved to Nashville Motor Speedway in Part 2 tomorrow night. Car racing in Nashville now moved into a new era about 1957. It was then that Nashville Speedway was built, and in the beginning it too, like Cumberland Speedway and the Legion Bowl, was a dirt track. Tonight, part 2 of our 5-part series of the history of stock car racing in Nashville. We call it From Dirt Roads to Fast Tracks. Racing continued at the old American Legion Bowl from 1950 to 1957, when a new era of stock car racing began.
The three of us, which is myself, Bill Donahoe, and Mark Parrish, got together and bought out the American Legion lease over on Cowan Street and formed our company called Nashville Speedways, and we ran over there quite successfully until 1957, when we contracted here and started building here. But
in 1957, the original famous or infamous 30-year lease was signed that Nashville Speedway has operated under ever since.
We negotiated with Beverly Briley, which was the county judge at that time. We then started construction of the fall of 1957, and we opened for business on the first race in August of 1958 with a Grand National, which is the Winston Cup type cars, and Joe Weatherly won the first race here.
But the first racing tragedy in Nashville motorsports history occurred in 1957 on the Old Mile dirt track.
Frank Reed got killed out here during the fair, and so we tore the place up and made it a half-mile high bank.
Nashville Speedway enjoyed tremendous popularity and success for the next 8 years. Then during the state fair on a Monday night in 1965, it happened.
An air conditioner, I believe, short-circuited or something back up in the woman's building and set the place on fire. Of course, everything was wood and oil-treated wood. It was a tinderbox, and it just went up just without anything that anybody could do.
Within a few hours.
Just right, just within a few hours. We rented a mobile home office, and we operated that way until I sold my interest in at the end of 1967.
We built a high bank and made them get up and run over 100 miles an hour again.
Now, you built this track a couple of times, didn't you?
Built it 3 times.
What happened?
This last time it's right. It's one of the best tracks in the country.
And so, Brenda, we will continue tomorrow night with part 3 of the series, and we will even take it a little bit further on down the road in Nashville Speedway's development and talk to some of the guys who drove out there back in the 60s, early 70s.
Okay.
On the history of stock car racing in Nashville. It's called From Dirt Roads to Fast Tracks, as we invite you to watch and listen and remember.
I was one of the drivers that made the transition from the old modified specials, or the coupe model cars, 34s, 35, 6s, to the late model Sportsman back in the middle 60s, I guess. Racing changed. It matured like everything else, and I guess I got started in it when it was
roughneck.
Roughneck, that's right. It really was.
Not only was it rough back then, it was also a time, not unlike today, when drivers would do and use anything to give them the edge.
The shoe polish was a basic ingredient that went in shoe polish at factory. And these boys working the factory got bootlegging it out for racing fuel. It smelled pretty bad, but outside of that, it run good. And the rust inhibitor we put in the radiator, at a race, some of the drivers got that run farther back in the pack got noticing this white stuff coming out of the radiator. And I just joking said it's sweet milk. The next race, there were several cars with sweet milk. During the race, it boiled and
White stuff.
white stuff, yeah.
Many race fans will well remember another changeover driver who won 3 track championships until a wreck ended his career in 1969.
Yeah, I was running when they made the change. I believe it was 64 when they made the changeover. And really and truly, I liked the low coupes because you didn't have any glass in them. They run a lot cooler. You catch a lot of that air and stayed a lot cooler. The full bodies had the glass in them, especially the windshield and the rear glass, and you get so much heat in them and everything. And I just didn't like them as much as I did the little coupes.
It's one of the last of its kind, a 1962 coupe, just as it was the last day it raced with the original tires.
This car was built by James Lawrence Stoffel and James Damewood Stoffel for Jack Marlin of Franklin. That was in 1962. And Jack drove it 1 year, and then I switched over and drove it in 1963. So it's been 25 years since Jack drove it, 24 years since I drove it. They were very, very popular, and I really enjoyed them. Old car still runs smooth as ever. Car racing took on all the momentum of a streaking locomotive here in Nashville during the 70s. It was the only pro sport in town, and the best came here to race. Tonight, part 4 of our series, The History of Stock Car Racing in Nashville, From Dirt Roads to Fast Tracks.
During the past 30 years, Nashville race fans have had the opportunity to witness all the great drivers of NASCAR, as well as some of the finest local talent anywhere in the country. One local driver competed on the track, then climbed on the flag stand for a different kind of view.
Well, I've flagged Fireball Robertson and the Grand Nationals here. Of course, a lot of the local boys, all the local boys that ran back during that time.
One of those drivers that Herb Lewis flagged at Nashville Speedway was the only 4-time track champion and a regular on the NASCAR circuit for a number of years. When you think about racing here and when you were winning so much, what comes to mind?
Well, I had a good crew, and when you sit down one of those cars, you got to put 100% to it. And even when you're behind, you still got to keep putting it out and maybe come back to be a winner right there.
The Nashville Speedway will always have a big place in your heart, won't it?
Thank you, I hope so.
During the 70s, there were other local favorites, such as Darrell Waltrip, Fluky Buford, James Ham, P.B. Crowell, and Walter Wallace. And one man who holds a record that will never be broken.
They hadn't been publicized or anything about the world record. And that's on the high bank 5 race mile racetrack. And I turned the track in 123.558. And that's cooking.
And nobody's touched it.
Nobody's touched it, and they won't.
And they never will, because that's a record that'll stand forever.
It's a high bank track, and there will be no bank like it anymore.
So when you go to sleep at night and you think about racing, you can say, well, I've got one and nobody will ever break.
That's it.
And tomorrow night, we will conclude our series on the history of stock car racing in Nashville. And tonight, we conclude our series on the history of stock car racing in Nashville. I hope you've enjoyed watching it as much as I've enjoyed putting it together, from dirt roads to fast tracks. In the past week, we have taken you through 40 years of stock car racing history in Nashville, from Cumberland Speedway in 1948 to the Legion Bowl of the 50s, then on to Nashville Speedway, the home of racing in Nashville since the mid-60s. Those that made it all happen are numerous, but the sport would never have even gotten off the ground if it were not for the Nashville race fans. Their loyalty, dedication, and love of the sport is the reason it has flourished and will continue to do so. Several weeks ago, the first ever Nashville Motorsports Hall of Fame was formed, and a banquet held to honor past drivers and owners. 3 were inducted into the Motorsports Hall of Fame: drivers Bob Reuther and Cuckoo Marlin, and former Nashville Speedway operator Bill Donahoe. That night, past track champions were introduced to the crowd at the Speedway and given a plaque to commemorate the occasion. And in just a few weeks, the Speedway undergoes yet another transition. Gary Baker will turn over the track reins to new operators, Jimmy Allen and Boyd Adams, in whose hands the future of the sport rests. Darrell, is there any track in the country that you run on or have run on that holds as special or dear a place in your heart as Nashville does?
No, sir. You know, that was a big interest I had in acquiring the lease to the racetrack, was to sort of put it back, and there's nothing wrong with it today, don't get me wrong, just sort of to bring back some of that nostalgia, to bring back those big names and let them race there one more time.
It has been a grand and glorious 40 years, and if history is an indication of the future, it tells us that during the months of summer, on a Saturday night, there will be a roar from the crowd when they hear And our sports has been brought to you tonight by Crystal.
Oh, great series. I've really enjoyed it. We'll be back with more in just a moment.